And welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. We need your money. Simple, to the point. And that's exactly what Detroit's emergency manager Kevin Orr told lawmakers in Lansing this week. It is time to get the grand bargain done. The legislation is underway, but it is no sure thing. There is strong resistance from banks and other creditors. They want to sell art from the DIA to get their payback. Also tonight, reports this week say the foundations of the Big Three and other companies have been asked to step in and give millions to the DIA. But what do the people of Michigan really want? A new poll tonight gives us a look. A new Epic MRA poll commissioned by the Detroit Journalism Cooperative, which Detroit Public TV is a part of, looked at what voters outside the city of Detroit think about the state's financial contribution to help the city exit from bankruptcy. On Tuesday, Detroit's emergency manager Kevin Orr testified before a state house committee as lawmakers continue to debate how to fund the so-called grand bargain. 600 voters were polled May 3rd through the 5th. A majority of voters across party lines, 62% in fact, supported state aid to Detroit once they were told the money would help protect city retirees' pensions and art at the DIA. Last week, lawmakers unveiled what's being called a hybrid plan. It would provide $195 million in a lump sum from Michigan's Rainy Day Fund, and the state would be reimbursed over the next 20 years with money from the tobacco settlement, and establish a 7-member financial oversight board for that same 20 years. 53% of the voters polled say they favored sending Detroit $350 million over 20 years from that tobacco settlement fund. The lump sum payment of $195 million was favored by only 30% of those polled. And perhaps most interesting, those polled do not seem willing to punish lawmakers who vote for financial support for the city. Overall, 55% said it would have no impact on their support for a candidate. And that trend continued even among Republicans, independents, and outstate voters. A solid 57% polled say it would have no impact on their vote. Perhaps the reason for the support? An understanding that a healthy Detroit is indeed necessary for the whole state to continue to prosper. A wide majority, ranging from 77 to 81%, say the city is essential or very important. There is a lot to get to tonight, so let's bring in our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley from the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, let's get right to it. And I want to start tonight with that poll that we just showed. Not overwhelming, but a pretty good chunk of support statewide for this bailout for Detroit.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the Glengarriff poll that Business Leaders from Michigan produced the week before. There seems to be an understanding statewide that that the state has a responsibility to help Detroit here, and beyond that, that it's necessary to get the state's largest city healthy again, up and running, for the competitiveness of the entire state.
You know, I think we had talked about this, that this would be a hard sell for people who are outside the metro area, outside of Southeast Michigan, but it doesn't seem like so much anymore. So is it just a fact that perhaps legislators aren't listening exactly what the constituents say?
Well, I mean, there may be some of that. I also think that the legislators are not as opposed to this as they're saying, right? I mean, this is not one of those sort of core hot button issues where people just say, look, I can't do this because I don't believe in it. This is a political issue and it's a deal, right? So the question is, what can you give me in exchange for me giving you this vote? And I think actually the governor and the leadership in both houses is working the process that way. You know, I think the legislators know there's not going to be any backlash against them for voting for this, but they raise that now as a way to try to coax some.
Well, in that poll, it said that that people would not punish their legislators for voting this way, that it would not change their vote in November.
And that's what the poll says. But these guys also hear from their constituents directly, and we don't know what they're hearing from them.
Well, that's true. Whether
it's consistent at all with these polls, you know, it's a risky vote for them because many of them represent districts that have other troubled communities within them, and the folks are asking, what about us?
Right.
We're going to give $200 million of state money to Detroit. What about Saginaw? What about Flint?
Well, what about
Benton Harbor? What about on and on and on? You know, it's not easy.
My column this morning talked about the members of the committee that's considering this. John Walsh from Livonia where pensions are not fully funded. They're at like 56%. There's a representative from Jackson whose pensions and healthcare are grossly underfunded. There's a representative from Birmingham and Bloomfield who have huge retiree healthcare unfunded liabilities. These are common problems across the state, and what I would hope is that, yeah, you need to give this money to Detroit because you gotta get this bargain done, and you gotta get the city out of bankruptcy and sort of on the road to recovery. But I hope this launches a larger discussion about how we fund cities, how we help cities deliver services. The model's broken.
Well, hopefully it'll start a larger discussion on what we do about unsustainable pension benefits and promises.
Well, that's part of
that's part of
the
it.
equation.
You know, the answer isn't just let's just keep pumping more and more money
Well, that's
into
not what I'm saying.
every troubled city. It's getting the cost of running these cities and meeting these obligations down to a reasonable level. But back to the poll, what's interesting here is, as in all of these polls that I've seen, even as you get far away from Detroit, even as you get into northern Michigan, far western Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, support wanes somewhat, but it's over 50%.
It's still pretty good.
It's over 50% in every single region of the state, which I don't think if you did a similar poll 5 years ago even, you would have seen that level of sympathy, if you will, or recognition of the importance of Detroit.
Oh, so, I mean, are we finally at this point where people understand that a healthy Michigan has to mean a healthy Detroit?
I think we're getting in that.
We might be. I'm not sure. I was surprised, frankly, by the depth of the support in all of the polls. I mean, you know, if you go to the west side of the state or up north and talk to people about Southeast Michigan, they don't always have nice things to say about the city or its problems, or they don't necessarily make the connection between, you know, their part of the state and us. And so this suggests that more people do than might be obvious.
And it may be just a recognition of how bad
About the situation is.
a Detroit that went completely under would be for the rest of the state. I think particularly in those suburban communities, because in Wayne and Macomb, out Wayne County and Oakland County, support was very strong, a little less so in Macomb County.
Yeah.
But it was into the over 70%
But again,
in the suburban communities.
Again, some of it could be that people recognize these problems that we're talking about in Detroit. They're outsized because Detroit's the largest city and dug the deepest hole. But, you know, Livonia, Birmingham, Bloomfield, those are stable communities that have the same problem with these legacy costs. But they also, you know, they also face the same problems that Detroit does in terms of the unbelievable drop in revenue sharing that we've done to cities. The threatened loss of personal property tax revenue. There are lots of things that we've done.
Which, by the way, will be replaced. You don't get people worked up about that.
Not dollar for dollar, but
the communities all support that. The municipal league supports that. You don't get people worked up about that, Steve. It's no loss to communities. But if you look at the package that John Walsh and his committee put together, it's not simply, okay, here, let's write a blank check or let's write a check. And
Well, no, I mean, there's oversight, and I think there has to be.
There's a lot of strings attached to that money, and I think that buys cover for these outstate lawmakers who can go to their voters and say, look, yeah, we gave them the money, but for 20 years we're going to keep our eyes on it. They've got to change their pension structure in the future so they don't get here again. There's a lot of oversight built into this bailout.
How did Kevin Orr do this week?
I thought he did as well as he could. I mean, you know, he's a pretty wily guy and knows his audience wherever he is, and he knew that he needed to sort of humble himself a little in front of the legislature.
I mean, but basically he said, "We need your money.
We need your money."
I mean, period.
Right, and there was a little bit of
lying.
No, right. I mean, there was a little bit of I think begging is probably the right word, and I think that plays with you know, some of the egos that you have up in Lansing who want to see that you know, you're recognizing that the power is in their hands. I thought the detail he included in his presentation was great and really impressive. Sandy Barua also, we should say, who's the chamber CEO, I thought made a fabulous case, and I kept sitting there thinking while he was talking, how unusual it seemed that the CEO of the chamber, which is a pretty conservative organization here in Southeast Michigan, would be up there saying, "You guys have got to do this because a stagnant Detroit, that doesn't get a chance to rebuild is a huge drain on the state."
And this problem doesn't go. They don't get rid of this problem just by voting against the bailout. I mean,
No.
if they turn this down, the problem it just keeps coming back to their lap. They've
Sure.
got to figure it out. I mean, this is everybody's problem now. And in the end, Detroit is a constitutional entity of the state.
Sure.
And it's the state's responsibility to make sure it survives.